Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the business case for a Fieldwork software platform. My name is Jake Freewald, and I'm in charge of product marketing here at Fulcrum. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about what field organizations have to do, because that plays into why specifically we need to talk about a Fieldwork software platform. And one of the things I'd like to really emphasize is that we need to keep the entire scope of the things that we do for Fieldwork in mind, because it's really critical that we're able to address everything the field does, or else we end up with fragmented infrastructure. So let's start off with inspections, things like looking at aging infrastructure, doing manhole and pole inspections, lead service line inventories. All of those kinds of inspections are critically important, of course. But we should go outside of what we think of as data collection and think about procedures. What kinds of processes are we engaged in? So maintenance SOPs, for example, is a really critical aspect of the day-to-day job of the field worker. And we need to make sure that we're considering what they need to do, as well as kind of this data collection kind of process. In addition, some things that we absolutely don't think of as data collection fall into here. Vegetation management, for example. The people out there in the field are wielding chainsaws and herbicides and things like that, and we need to think about how do we show that they're compliant with what needs to happen, as well as just the specific. We need to think about the data that we're collecting to demonstrate that they're doing the right thing, as well as helping them follow the processes that they need to engage in. And finally, safety underlies all of this, whether it's something like confined space permitting, logout, tagout checklists, or anything of the sort. So because all of these things are done by field workers all of the time, we want to keep in mind that we should be looking at the entire scope of what we do. That's different from what you'll hear from people sometimes when they're trying to get something off the ground, because they're concerned about scope creep. But scope creep, that fear of scope creep will stop you from thinking about how you should do every one of these tasks, which means somebody's going to decide, well, what you chose for this task over here doesn't work for that one over there, so I'm going to do my own thing. And then you end up with fragmented infrastructure that won't suit the bill. So, so keep in mind all of the things that field organizations do. Now, because we're talking about the business case for a Fieldwork software platform, I want to focus on four major things that really require us to have specialized equipment, specialized software that will tackle the challenges that we have as field organizations. So first, regulatory uncertainty; second, geospatial; third, field tech. I'll explain what that is, and you'll probably see immediately why that matters. And then finally, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the fact that most field teams actually serve a lot of different bosses, and that's going to take actually a few minutes to go through, because it's such a critical part of why people struggle to get the right kind of software necessary in order to perform digital transformation for the field. That fourth bullet is actually going to be really important. So those four things are going to structure the next 30 minutes or so as we go through what the business case is for a Fieldwork software platform. So let's start with regulatory uncertainty. It's certainly the 800-pound gorilla, especially around NEPA compliance, the 1970 law that created the EPA and a variety of other requirements around environmental work. What we've seen over just the past month is a new executive order. We saw a memo from Catherine Scarlett, who is the Chief of Staff for the Council on Environmental Quality. She put out that memo on the 19th. And just 2 days ago, if you're watching this live, there was a proposed rule about the removal of NEPA implementing regulations. And that's got, I think, a 60-day comment period coming in. So we've got some changes happening extremely quickly. And the expectation is that there's going to be more change, and some of that change may be radical. There's been a lot of talk about shock and awe in the Trump administration. Should we expect more of that coming? I think one thing that really anchors this for me personally is looking at NEPA.gov today. I pulled this screenshot today to make sure it was still live. And if they say for more information on CEQ initiatives, visit whitehouse.gov/CEQ. If you followed that link on the 19th of January, you would have found a web page about the Council of Environmental Quality, and you'd be able to navigate that section a little bit. But if you go out there today, you'll find it just redirects to whitehouse.gov. There is no separate CEQ set of pages on the website right now at whitehouse.gov. So it's a pretty big change. Now, to be fair, not everything on that page originally on the 19th was that interesting. It had news updates. It had an America the Beautiful Freshwater Challenge. It talked about the former chair, and it talked about the internship program. But the fact that they just said, okay, we're going to slash through this this website and not give space to the CEQ on its own is somewhat indicative to me of the kind of thing that we can expect from the incoming administration, for better or for worse. You can decide, but it's what we have to expect. So given all of that, let's look at the current guidance. This comes from Catherine Scarlett's memo on the 19th. And I've emphasized a couple of phrases here, and there's a bunch like it in that same memo and in other guidance. They expect agencies to continue to follow their existing practices and procedures. But in the same breath, literally the same sentence, they say implementing NEPA and consistent with the text, this executive order that President Trump put out on the 20th, and this guidance. Both of those things are very, very new. And of course, it would include the rule that was proposed on the 25th, if that rule gets approved. So do your existing thing, but do it consistent with what I'm currently telling you right this minute. That could be frightening for a lot of people because they're not really sure where all this is going to go. So for environmental regulation requirements, the situation that we find ourselves in is this. First of all, we need the same kind of rigor that we've always had in dealing with environmental situations. We need to be able to take the existing practices and procedures that we have and continue to implement them effectively, because we are not, we are still responsible for those practices and procedures right now based on what has happened historically. We need to document what the process is, and by documentation I mean both the sequence of events that we do whenever we're engaged in a process and the proof that we have complied with that process each and every step along the way. And then of course there's other reports that we may need to do as part of our day-to-day that include the information that comes out of the processes that we engage in for environmental requirements. Naturally, one of the key things that we have to do is avoid penalties for non-compliance with the current rules, right? There are current rules and we're supposed to comply with them, so we need to avoid those penalties. Now, let's talk about the flexibility that we need though, because that's one side, is we obviously need that rigor, but at the same time, we know that we are going to be updating our practices and procedures in the near term, in the very, very near term. So we need to be able to turn on a dime to be able to implement new practices and procedures. That includes the ability to create the reports and the data feeds that we've been providing, right? So if you've got a customer and you've been putting out data feeds to that customer, then when you flip over the process, you need to seamlessly have the new data be put into both those reports and into any kind of digital feeds you may have. We need to make sure that we're going to avoid penalties for non-compliance with the changes, right? So we are saying, okay, we need to be compliant with the current rules and we need to be compliant with the changes. We need to be able to switch that out extremely fast. And finally, as we make that switch, we need continuity. So from one day to the next, even though you're changing the steps, you need to be able to get a look. You need to be able to get a look at all of the things that you have done to remain compliant across all of the rules that you've been engaged in, regardless of how your process has changed. That continuity can be extremely challenging. So there are two things then that we really need to do if we're going to comply with environmental requirements, and that is first, process standardization, so we get that rigor we're looking for, and process customization, so we can change our processes on a dime and still have our field teams moving as quickly as they need to. We need both of those things simultaneously. Remember those two words, standardization and customization. They're coming back. So in general, that's our situation for environmental requirements. Another thing that is unique to field organizations that frankly most office organizations simply don't understand, they just don't get it, is geospatial requirements. So let's take a look at one of those people that we were talking about before who goes out in the field to do maintenance standard operating procedures, right? This is a person who is engaged in doing either inspections or actual maintenance work on various pieces of equipment. They might be doing as-builts for your solar field and so on and so forth. Geospatial data is has got to be thought of as a two-way street. There is usually a system of record for geospatial data in an organization that is usually Esri's ArcGIS platform. It could be something else, but generally that's the one. That's the biggest platform out there. And we need to be able to get information to that person, and we need to be able to get information from that person. What the field team member needs includes things like base maps. Show me where I'm supposed to be working and the geographic characteristics of that area, whether it's a, geographic characteristics could include things like elevation and so on. But give me all of the information about what is in the space that I'm working. Let me use, if I'm out in the field, feature service layers. What does that mean? That's a format or a kind of a mechanism for communicating geospatial data from ArcGIS, Esri's ArcGIS, out to other systems, other people. And that includes a lot of the context about the area that they're working in. So for example, this person doing a maintenance SOP might need to know what area they're in, what political boundary they're in. Are they in this municipality? Or are they in that county? Where exactly are they standing? That might be one thing. They might also need to know about the effect of what they are doing could have on the surrounding area. If they're doing preventive maintenance on a transformer on a power pole, they need to know what the area around them is, how the area around them is going to be affected by the work that they're doing, especially if something goes wrong. So that context is something that comes from your geospatial center, your geospatial system of record, and is given to the person standing out there in the field. That system of record of geospatial data includes a lot of asset information. So it's not just about the location itself. It's also, okay, what's at that location? If it's a transformer, what's the serial number of that transformer? When was the last time it was inspected? What was the result of that inspection? Could be any of those kinds of things. So there's going to be some specific asset data that is coming from your geospatial system of record. Note that I'm talking about asset data, and many of you are thinking, well, I've also got an enterprise asset management platform. That's going to come back up again later in this conversation too. So the asset data is going to be important, and it's in more than one place. So it includes locations and attributes. We want to be able to take information about plans. I mentioned before that you've got as-built of your solar construction project, for example. Well, you want to be able to georeference what the plan was to have that solar field constructed, and then you want to be able to reference your location and the things that you're looking at relative to those plans. So you can say, okay, well, this one was off by 10 centimeters or whatever it might be. You need to be able to have that georeferencing from those plans. So that's what the field needs. The field needs a lot of information and a lot of context to understand what it is that they should be doing. The more information you give them without overwhelming them, the better off they are. Meanwhile, back in the office, the GIS team also needs geospatial information. Before I even get to information, actually, one of the things they need is more time, right? The GIS team typically is focused on some kind of analysis. They're creating maps that give people better decision-making capabilities because they're showing off all of the interesting things about the project that they're working on. And that means that they would be really happy if they don't have to change things every single time your field team needs something. An example I like to think about is when you've got people out in the field, one of the requirements they have is safety requirements. The supervisor of the field team might say, I want to get a video of a walkabout of the area so I'm sure that the area is safe. Well, if the GIS team has to implement that in GIS software, that takes longer than if the field team can do that themselves. So by not forcing the GIS team to support the field teams as they go about their business, the GIS team gets more time to do what it's most focused on, which is better analysis of the geospatial data that they have. Having said all that, they also need some geospatial information. So for example, if someone goes out to that transformer and finds out that the asset information is incorrect, the serial number is wrong for some reason, well, they want that validation of asset information to flow into the GIS so they've got the right, most up-to-date information they can possibly get. The location is very important there, and there will be some process information and some attributes. So for example, the process information about when it was last inspected could be very important. The attribute like the serial number could be very important. Do they need to have everything, every single piece of information about what happened when you went out there to do that SOP? Probably not. You don't need to know that bolt number 3 was put in. That's not important for the GIS team. So some of that process information, some of those attributes will flow into the GIS team. Don't think just about the point where you're at. Think about the lines that the GIS team is engaged in thinking about too. So if you're doing pipeline inspections, you want to know, I went from this point to that point, and there's a line between them that includes the pipeline. Same thing with power lines. So that geospatial characteristic, the fact that this is a line that we're dealing with, is very important for the field team. You know who doesn't really think that way? The person out there doing the maintenance SOP, right? The person out there doing the maintenance SOP is not a GIS person typically, so that person is not thinking, okay, I need to give back lines. But if they have the capability to provide information about those lines, that's going to make the GIS team be put into a stronger position. Likewise with polygons or areas, right? You may have drainage areas that they're focused on because of wastewater draining off a construction site. You could have the extents of the species that an invasive species that are out there inside the solar field. It's important for the solar field people because they are looking at preventing the species from growing too tall over the top of their solar panels. So they can capture that information, and if they push that back into the GIS team is now able to understand what maintenance requirements there are going to be for that area for future planning. So there's a ton of information that the field team, which is not a set of GIS people, can deliver to the GIS team that's of high value. This is a two-way street, and geospatial data is going to be critically important for field teams to be able to maximize their productivity and minimize the number of errors they make and maximize their compliance with the kinds of regulations that they have to comply with. All right, the next thing I'd like to mention is field tech requirements. Field tech doesn't have a real definition out there yet, but this is the way I think about it. Hardware and software that is acquired by the field, right? So this is stuff that the field said I need, and whether they personally bought it, whether it came out of their budget or not, it's acquired by them and it's managed by them, right? So this is not something that your IT manager typically isn't the one managing the drones. There's somebody out in the field team that is managing the drones. You may have 3D cameras that you run down a pipe. That's probably something that the IT people don't necessarily have a real understanding of. They don't understand the use case necessarily as well as you do out in the field. So having that 3D camera is something that you're going to manage because you're the only one who really knows how to manage it. And finally, it's used to solve field-specific problems. The safety equipment that you have, whether it is, you see here a reflective vest, but there are also other safety equipment that you might have that could be a radiation, something that measures radiation, or something that measures the oxygen level in an enclosed space, or whatever it might be. All of that stuff is key for your field teams to own because they're the ones who are going to rely on it to do their jobs, and therefore those field-specific problems naturally fall to those people. The bottom three on the screen, I think, are also really important too. GIS is like I said, is a two-way street. So to some extent, you've got field tech that is, or pardon me, you've got a GIS that is built for the office, right? These are the people doing analytics back in the office, for example. But there are typically some kind of GIS requirements out in the field too. Might involve specialized GPSs, might involve specialized interactions with the GIS system back at the office, like somebody in the field can get information from back there. So GIS could be seen as field tech. It kind of blurs the line between field tech and office tech, if you will. Routing is a very typical requirement that we see. How do I get from this place where I'm doing this work to that place where I'm doing that work? And then finally, we put a lot of effort into, as multiple industries, into automating the capture of information. And so sensors can become really important to us in a couple of different ways, right? If I'm trying to look at a pipe and seeing a water pipe and seeing how much I there is, basically how much water may leak into or leak out of that pipe. If I'm trying to figure that out, then I might have a sensor in one place that shows information, and one of the things that I have to do is verify that in fact I see that level of pressure, or I see that amount of water flowing through that pipe, or whatever it may be. All of the work that we've done to put in these sensors enables us to be better in the field, and also enables those of us who are in the field to almost act as sensors, to contribute to what those sensors are providing by validating them and perhaps augmenting them with some different information or updated information. So that's field tech. It's a lot of stuff acquired by the field, managed by the field to solve field specific problems. It's hardware or software, could be either one. When you are in the field, there's an opportunity for field tech to interact with you at every step along the way. So consider, for example, prior to going out, you might want to get information from Esri ArcGIS to understand where the assets are that you're going out to. You might want to get information from, those are on the bottom, right, the enterprise systems. You might want to pull out information from the asset management system, and you're being tasked potentially through a field service management platform. So all of that is coming out of your enterprise systems. And your field tech is going to be providing you with a lot of that context. You may have previous 3D camera information or drone data that shows you what you should be doing. The drone data might be a flyover of an area where you think vegetation management needs to be done. Well, you want that information referenced inside whatever field platform you're using in order to understand what you expect to see when you get out there to do that vegetation management. So before you even set foot outside of the office or outside of your house or outside of your truck, you may have the ability to assemble information that gives the field team the kind of context they need to do a better job at their job. While they're actually doing that job, there may be a number of additional things that they need to get. I already mentioned sensors and talked a little bit about how we can get information that we then validate or that tells us whether or not we need to look at something. You can pull in arbitrary web services. My favorite demo of this, just because it's so common, is to be able to pull information from a weather service. You know, instead of somebody standing there and typing with two thumbs, it's, you know, looks kind of clear and it's not too cold. Instead, you get something from the local weather service saying, you know, 70% cloud cover or 30% cloud cover, you know, 55 degrees and humidity of 55%. Like, you can get that level of precision without having your field worker actually have to put that information directly with their two thumbs into the system. And of course, you know, very often that data is much better, higher quality than you would get from typing in as well. While you're in the field, you might do things like send out alerts if you see something wrong, there's a safety hazard, there's a real problem developing, send out an alert immediately. You might use that geospatial information in ArcGIS to be able to say, okay, well, I'm here, get me to the closest manhole that's attached to that pipe, so that you can, you know, do some work to repair a given pipe or something like that. So the ability to, while you're in the field, dynamically call ArcGIS can be really important as well. And then finally, when you're all done, one of the least liked things by the customers I've talked to, the field teams that I've talked to, is going back after the day is done and having to do all of the paperwork and the drudgery that involves. And what you should be doing, ideally, is pushing information back where it belongs in a more automated kind of a way. You want to push information back, if you caught video today, into the video storage. You may have done some amount of work today, but didn't get to all of it. Well, that's important for operations planning for the next day. I need to be able to push that information back to the systems that are owned by the field and managed by the field to help manage field operations. I need to be able to push that information back. And of course, at the same time, I'm going to push it to enterprise systems, whether it's updates to my geospatial system or let the field service management platform know that I'm done with whatever I've tried to accomplish, et cetera, et cetera. So pushing information back out is a very, very common post-activity requirement. So this is something, like I said, that most IT people, most people who are really familiar with office systems simply don't understand. They don't have the context to understand it, but it's something that's critical to field teams each and every day. Finally, let's talk a little bit about serving bosses, because, and this is kind of a funny section, because I'm using the word boss, but you may think industry leader, you may think vice president. There may be a lot of things you think of when I go through this that isn't boss, but that's okay. Boss is going to serve as a placeholder. And it's kind of funny, actually. I reached out to my son a little while ago when I was getting ready for this presentation, and I said, okay, kid, what can I use for a boss? What's a good picture of a boss? And I'm thinking, of course, like Pokemon, because I remember him when he was 6, but he's not 6 anymore. Now he's 30, and he sent me back this guy. And I said, well, that's a little dark. I'm not sure I can do that. And then I said, well, look, may as well get the whole Game of Thrones cast out here. And it occurred to me that Daenerys Targaryen had some really great memes associated with her. So let's stick with her as the boss for right now. And we'll assume it's before she went absolutely insane in the last season. So let's talk about who this boss is. when you're talking to Daenerys or whoever, what does this person think about themselves and their role in the company? First, they own one of the most critical functions in the business. This is almost always true. They are as important as they think they are, because if you're responsible for finance or you're responsible for customer success or whatever it may be, that probably is one of the most critical functions in the business, or it wouldn't be there. The person who is in charge of that critical function has a platform. This is really common in the office space, which is kind of funny given the meme. This is very common in the office because they know that they have to have the official data for their function. They have to run their business, and this is the way they run their business. So they might know, they do know, that there are other systems that contain data about it. There's a data warehouse. There are other platforms that have customer numbers and customer information in them. But for the boss's purpose, their platform holds the actual data that makes their business run. That's all they care about. And what that means is that when you want data, you're going to get that data through an API or an integration platform that that person owns. And that's true whether you want the data from them, like we talked about with GIS earlier. I want to get that information out to the field. You're going to get that from them, or when you send it to them, you're going to use an API into their system, or you're going to use their integration platform to do it. And this makes total sense. If you think about it, they are responsible, therefore they have to have the authority to manage that data appropriately. Similarly, with process changes, you need to do those process changes in their platform. So if you are focused on asset management, then you are going to do asset management changes through, let's say, IBM's Maximo, through that person who runs asset management. If you'll notice, when we talk about what that platform does for them, it helps them standardize, customize, and integrate processes. I talked before about the fact that as field workers, we need to be able to standardize and customize the processes that we're engaged in. They already have a platform that does that. IBM Maximo is, for many people, the way that you standardize and customize processes for asset management. Esri ArcGIS is the way that you standardize and customize processes that are related to geospatial analysis. That's the nature of what a platform does. And because when people do want their data and people do need to send them data, the integration of data is also happening through their platform. This makes total sense, and it's the ordinary way of the world in the office. It's not the ordinary way of the world in the field. When you consider all of the people that are out there that field workers serve, there are a variety of different ways that these people manage their information. They have different systems. They are not necessarily integrated systems. They have different process requirements and documentation requirements. They use different integration platforms. And by the way, I've got 4 here: enterprise asset management, field service management, enterprise resource planning, and geospatial information systems, right? I've got 4, but there's a lot more. I could talk about safety here as well. For example, there's frequently a safety management system, and that safety management system, of course, is critically important because safety is so important. And the person in charge of safety says, this is my thing. I need you to go through this platform to give me information or get information. So there's 4, but there's actually a lot more than these 4. You need to be on the lookout for any organization that's dealing with, that owns a business function and has a platform to help them do that. Well, given all of that, it's important to note that the reason that field people, or the way that field people have to interact with those systems, is frequently dictated by the boss, right? The boss says, I've got a platform that does what I need to do, manages my processes, manages my data, and I need you to do something for me out there in the field, asset management, for example, and therefore I need you to use my asset management mobile app in order to get that job done. Well, that mobile app is not necessarily designed for the field worker. It's designed for the platform owner. And so you'll see, as you look at these kinds of what I call bolted on apps, you'll see that first of all, they're attached to a single app or platform. IBM's is called, or Maximo's is called Maximo Mobile. And it's attached to Maximo, period, end of story. It's not really designed to do anything else. And it'll have built-in best practice processes, right? IBM makes its living in some ways by saying, here are the things that you should do as part of your asset management process. Well, great. it's good that they build in best practices there, but when they build it in, it's only from that parent app's perspective. It only manages their data. It doesn't worry about what would go into the safety management system necessarily, or what would go into the GIS platform. It's built with their app or platform in mind. So because of this mindset, because of this bolt-on mindset, and you'll see, by the way, it's not just one that's over there. There's actually multiple different apps that have to get used in practice. Some of the issues that we face from that is that you get mixed OS and hardware requirements. You've got something for Maximo Mobile, you've got something for the products from Esri or from Oracle or from whatever it is. So each of those has different requirements and different, both for hardware and software. So IT has to make sure that they're managing that with all of the different kinds of bolted-on apps that they need. The change that you're trying to do can be hard, and it involves at least one parent app, right? So that person I mentioned before, I want to get a video walkabout of the area so I know that I'm safe. Well, who's going to manage that? Am I going to get that in Maximo Mobile? Am I going to get that in Survey 123 from Esri? Am I going to get that in? What am I going to get that in? Who am I going to put that in? Is it going to go to my safety management system? So even knowing who should take responsibility for making a change can be complicated. And once you've got that change requirement set up, it can take a long time for people to actually make the change itself. So change can be extremely hard. We hear from customers that you have situations where they wanted to make changes and it could take them months to make simple changes, just because of the complexity that they were dealing with the mobile app, and less the individual mobile app itself, but the parent app that it was bolted onto. Very often you get duplicate data because you've got information that has to go into the enterprise asset management app. There's data there, and there's data that some of that same data needs to go into ArcGIS, let's say. So you're going to duplicate that data. It can be done in one of two ways. It can be done either by you doing double entry of that data, or it can be done by doing integration behind the scenes. Both of those can be complicated, especially because, remember, on the integration side, that gets managed by a particular app or platform for a particular area. So who wins if you're going to do integration? Are you going to update ArcGIS first and then duplicate that into Maximo, or are you going to update Maximo first and duplicate that in ArcGIS? You got to work these things through, and that can become political and complicated. I'd like to drill down for just a second on the duplicate data problem, because I think this is something, this really shows why a fieldwork platform can be so important. So I'm going to take the four categories of software I talked about before: enterprise asset management, field service management, enterprise resource planning, and geospatial information systems. I'm going to take those four categories, and I'm going to make a Venn diagram that shows you all of the different places where data can be stored, related data can be stored for a fairly straightforward set of requirements. Let's start with what they all share, right? The place in the middle is what they all share. They all have to know who your worker is, right? Who's out in the field? Well, I have to know that if I'm updating stuff in my GIS, because I have to make sure they have permissions and all that stuff to do that update. Field service management, there's an open ticket. I need to know the worker doing that. Enterprise asset management, I'm doing an inspection of something. I need to know who the inspector was. Workers are in all of those different systems. The equipment that you're using, parts, the work orders you're working on, all of these kinds of statuses and so on that you need to deal with. Every single one of these systems has some variation of all of those different data elements in it. If you look at what's unique to asset management, it might be the type of the maintenance schedules for the asset type. I mentioned transformer earlier, or water pump, or whatever it might be. That asset type with well, whatever that asset type is going to have a maintenance schedule of such and such, right? I need to know that generically for the category. I also need to know, when I'm looking at a specific asset with a specific serial number, I need to know what the maintenance history of that specific item is, and that's usually contained in the EAM system. And you might get some additional catalog information like pictures of whatever the asset is and so on. You got similar things with field service management. This is typically the software that's used to roll out field teams. Here's the truck that's going out. Well, I need to know, what truck is it? Why is it going out? That means a customer order. What's the fueling history? Did I get sign off from the customer once the job was done effectively? All of those things would be in field service management. Enterprise resource planning is a generic term that includes a lot of different things, but among the other things that it carries in it is customer information, order information, and billing information. GIS, like I said, it's the system of record for everything that has to do with location, which means a huge amount of information. So yeah, they include asset information, customer information, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera as well. And then finally, you look at things that overlap, like asset costs and requisitions. Well, the ERP is going to know what the costs and requisitions are, and the EAM has to have those costs and requisitions, so they're going to duplicate data. Supplier locations are going to be for GIS and ERP, and the routes are going to be between the GIS, because it's location, and the FSM, because that's who's rolling the trucks out. And by the way, customer locations and warehouse sites, you get where I'm coming from? There's a lot of duplicate data in all of these systems, and the people who own it are the bosses. You know who's not owning all of this in their own platform most of the time, and certainly not with those bolt-on applications? It's not the field team. The field team doesn't get to own what it does as much. It's usually being done with a bolt-on scenario. It's always being done for each of these different kinds of systems. So the duplicate data problem is huge. And as a result of that duplicate data problem, we find process issues as well. So I've got a leased HVAC unit, and I've got to go out to do some work on it. So I'm going to go to the FSM, the Field Service Management System, or I'm going to go to the EAM to get the work order and the task list and the parts. I'm going to, if I'm trying to standardize a process, I'm right out of the gate concerned about, okay, which one of these do I go to, and who wins, sort of. I go to the field service management to go to the warehouse, check out the parts and the gear. I might have to do double entry, by the way, because when I check out parts, the EAM system might need to know about those parts and so on. Get my truck assignment. I'm going to route to the asset given whatever mechanism I choose to do. EAM is going to get the asset information. EAM plus GIS is going to get that information back. So do I do double entry there? Do I do integration behind the scenes? Customer sign off and field service management and EAM together, double enter tasks. I got to do the work order closeouts. I might have to double enter the amount of time that I as the field worker spent. And everything that I'm working with here has update statuses of whatever types they want. The bolt-on approach works for the people who are in the office, but it's terrible for the person who's out in the field. It makes things so much more complicated. When Tommy really just wants to repair the water pump that he's working on, being able to, or being required to deal with all of this chaos is just so complicating his job. So if many bosses means that you're going to use bolt-ons, then stand by, because you're going to get disconnected workflows, you're going to have redundant data entry, and you're going to have mounting inefficiencies. The more that you get involved, the more you try to transform digitally using bolt-ons, the worse those inefficiencies are going to get. And our gentleman on the right-hand side here who looks pretty unhappy, it's because he's holding his laptop, he's got the phone on, and he has to do a lot of different things in order to make anything happen out there in the field. So, not a pretty picture. Hopefully there's an alternative to that. What is the alternative? I'll tell you what most people start with. And I've talked to a number of customers and people at trade shows and people who are doing exactly this. A field organization realizes that bolt-ons are problematic because they've done this task here, and they've found that the field worker just ends up with a mess. So they say to themselves, I can fix this problem by building a homegrown app. So somebody has the vision for it. They start to specify what that app needs to look like. They get the app funded, usually with the promise of some kind of improvement in a performance or productivity, some kind of ROI in it. As that vision increases, frequently scope creep could be a problem here, right? Because you do have to think about all of the different things that field people are doing. And the first step in making it happen, once you've got the vision down and the specification down, is to do the integration from all of these office systems into some kind of platform that you're using, some kind of system that you're using to do that integration with. And there are a number of ways that can be done. I'm not going to go into all the detail on how that can be done. And this looks kind of chaotic, but anybody who's actually done this work knows that this is a vast oversimplification of what this actually looks like. There are three different colors up there, partly because those are actually potentially three different use cases that people are engaged in. So they build apps for each of those use cases, and they train people on how those apps are going to be used, and then they deploy them to the field. So now what have I done? I've reduced a little bit of the complexity on the part of the field worker, but I've built up a lot of complexity there in the middle. So the result that you get from trying to go this route and build these homegrown apps is, I break it down into two areas. The first one is technological, where I have low process agility. I still have the same problem I had before. I am going to request that a change be made. It's got to go into a queue. The queue is filled with people who have a lot of other work to do. Frequently what's happened here really is that the IT company, the IT organization within a company is acting like an app dev shop, and that's not what they're best at. So they end up with long wait times, they end up with very low agility, and they end up with just an incredible hassle to get anything done. They're also typically slow to adopt new technology. Think about AI, for example. As people are saying, oh, well, I want to do AI, you've got to have people who are focused on what it really means to do AI. It's not a simple concept to say, okay, well, because I can tell you right now that the person out in the field isn't concerned about somebody summarizing their emails for them. So there goes like 98% of what people talk about with ChatGPT. So you need to have somebody thinking about how AI can be applied appropriately, and then they need to have the skill set to say, how am I going to bring this into the apps that I'm building for the field? That can make it very slow to adopt AI in that case, but really any new technology. And you get tech debt, and if there's stuff that you're interested about there, I'd be happy to take questions on that too. What happens as a result of all of this is reversion to paper. It's a business issue in a way, but it's also a technology issue. It means that the technology that you've got is not working for people. They say, well, the technology that gives me the flexibility and the rigor that I need is paper, so I'm going to go back to that. And now you've got to do things like take your paper documents, type them into a spreadsheet or scan them if you're really lucky, and then upload that in a spreadsheet to the system that's actually supposed to capture the information that you need. Reversion to paper is a clear sign that what you're doing is failing the people who need it most. And I've talked to a lot of customers on this kind of thing. Even when they tell me that they have even when they say, yes, we were doing digital transformation, we've digitally transformed a significant part of our process, very often there's a piece out there where they're still reverting to paper because they haven't figured out how to adapt to that yet. That's one of the reasons they come to Fulcrum, is to solve that problem. How do I stop people from reverting to paper? Business impact can relate to a number of different things, all of which are related to the lack of flexibility or the lack of rigor. First, they can't serve clients effectively because the client is asking them for one change to their process, and they can't easily insert that change into their process. That kind of thing is a major issue. Or they don't have the appropriate data. They can't serve the data out there well. They get poor decision making because the data that they are collecting is slow or bad, or is simply not collected because it's too hard to collect it. So they get poor decision making as a result of not having the technology that they need in place. And often they fall behind the competition. One company that came to Fulcrum 5 years ago or something talked about the fact that they were unable to work with small government organizations. They were working with larger government organizations, large cities, large states, counties. They were unable to work with small government organizations because the setup to get the job done just took too long. It was too complicated. Once they moved to Fulcrum, they were able to say, okay, well, now I'm able to actually compete in that new line of business, which enabled them to keep more of the market and even expand their market in order to be more competitive with the people out there that were trying to do the work alongside them. And then finally, of course, high cost. As soon as you've got 5 people or 10 people focused on building apps for the field, that's a lot of work and that's a lot of money, and that's going to mean that there's a large cost associated with that. The thing to note, though, is that all of the things I just described are actually things that platforms solve. Like I said, the Office systems always have platforms associated with them. That's why they're able to say to you, if you want to integrate with me, you're going to use my platform to do it. They have a platform. The ROI, the real business case comes from key capabilities in those platforms. By the way, if you're interested in ROI, I do have a webinar where I go through extensively with formulas and working out sample problems and so on, exactly how to calculate ROI from these things. So if you're interested in a deeper dive there, please let me know and I'll be happy to direct you that way. But the ROI that a field software platform provides comes from key capabilities, specifically the same kinds of things that Office platforms gives. Rapid field process customization, standardization that enables you to get the rigor that you need, and integration that enables you to get information from Office platforms and from field tech, and also push information back to Office platforms and to field tech. Those are the things that platforms give you, and that's why what we really need is for the field to have the same capability to control its own destiny that all of those Office organizations do. The impact that you get from having that field software platform is better service to your clients because you're more agile and you're more able to make the changes that they need in order to get the right results. You're able to get better decisions because you've got more complete data, more accurate data, and it's coming to you in real time. You're getting the agility to outperform the alternatives, including paper, but not just paper, and also to outperform the competitors that you may have in your marketplace. Who are always trying to outdo you or to specialize, to subspecialize. You're able to outperform them, and finally, you're able to contain the costs associated with these large application development processes that you would otherwise be engaged in. This is, in some ways, the field software platform is in some ways a new market category, but IDC and Lynn Schneider specifically, she works on data as a service. That's what that acronym means in the lower left, lower right, and location and geospatial intelligence. Lynn Schneider has talked about that a little bit, saying that this kind of platform that gives you location-enabled field process and data collection is transformative. And it is something that's a critical tool to drive efficiency, flexibility, and ensure data accuracy across field operations. By the way, there is a white paper that goes more down into detail on the nature of the bolt-on problem and the homegrown application problem that is in your attachments in GoToWebinar. So you can pull that down right now. There's no need to sign in or anything like that to get it. You can just grab it. That's the gist of the business case for Fieldwork software platforms. Fulcrum, we normally call Fulcrum a field process management and data collection platform. It's a little shorter to say Fieldwork software platform. That's what I've been using through this presentation. So I'm just going to talk about it in that term for this, but I want to just give you a sense of what Fulcrum is, because the things that I'm telling you about aren't things that I've learned from my own independent fieldwork. I'm not actually a field worker, although I say we a lot in this context. But it's coming from our clients, thousands of clients, tens of thousands of people using Fulcrum for field work across the globe, and they are a really important part of what we serve them, and because we serve them, we learn what's important to them. Now, what we see as the constant problem is that field teams are struggling with inefficient tools, and those tools are causing, excuse me, more frustration than actually giving them help. The solution to doing that is to have a field-first platform that is going to help those field workers boost their own productivity and streamline the operations that they're engaged in. And Fulcrum is that's what we live by. This is what we do. This is our reason for being. If you start to use Fulcrum, then within the first day, you will start by digitizing some process that you've got in a browser, deploying that process out to your field workers on a mobile device. We can do this with whether you're online or offline. If you're online, sometimes there are a little bit more capabilities. The data gets back faster. But if you're offline, we're going to capture all that information, still have your geospatial information and so on. And as soon as you get to a point where you can connect, then we'll pass that information back. That information goes back to the field management side of the house, back sitting in the office, where they'll be able to do analysis and edit the information, and that information will be pushed into important systems for analysis, whether it's geospatial analysis in Esri, business intelligence in Power BI, or whether it's those other kinds of systems we've talked about. In addition, Fulcrum automates reporting in a way that enables you to get real-time PDF reports or other kinds of reports out of Fulcrum extremely quickly. One moment, sorry. Once you've been using Fulcrum for a day or two or three, you're going to find that there are some key things that Fulcrum is going to do for you that really applies to field work in critical ways. The geospatial focus that we've got, integrating with Esri products, enabling someone who is not a GIS specialist to collect GIS data, including points, lanes, and polygons, can be really important. And being able to feed information from your ArcGIS into your field team is also really critical. The ease of use is perhaps the most important thing about it. The people who are out there using Fulcrum today are not technical people. They are not people who are interested in how cool our user interface is. They're just not interested in those things. They have a job to do, and if their job is going to be fixing a pump or doing inspections of a transformer, that's what they need to do. So unless it helps them, then it's in the way. So we are laser focused on ease of use. One of the latest, most interesting things we've done is to create something we call audio fast fill, where instead of typing with 2 thumbs and getting information in that kind of slowish sort of way, you can simply speak into your phone. And we're not talking about typical text to speech here, where it'll just fill out one form. We're talking about you talk about all the fields that you're looking at as you want to go through, and it'll parse what you say and put that information into a Fulcrum into the app that you're using. And that means that you can have, in some cases, much higher productivity. In some cases, people are just more comfortable speaking instead of typing, so they'll give you more information than they would have otherwise. And generally speaking, the response to that capability has been phenomenal. It's a real practical use of AI because we're so focused on what the field team needs and not just on having AI as a cool buzzword. I like AI as a buzzword, but that's not what we're interested in. And then finally, being able to use the capabilities of Fulcrum to make people more productive frequently leads to more success and more people wanting to use it, and people coming up to you and saying, oh, here's some more use cases we got out of it. So in order to do that, we have to support very large organizations who need to be able to manage things like the groups of people, the teams that are associated with what those projects are involved in. I need to be able to use a single sign-on in order to make sure people are signing in correctly and we're applying our correct security from IT. I need to be able to use SCIM to do onboarding more easily. So just the enterprise side of this, if you're concerned about that, that's something that we would love to talk about, because that scalability is really crucially important. Once you've been using Fulcrum not for a couple of days or a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, but I'm not talking about 6 months to a year. I'm talking about a very short period of time. You'll start to realize the advantage of Fulcrum being the standardization capabilities that we bring. You're going to be able to really make sure that you've got the process rigor necessary to engage in any kind of activity that you need. And also simultaneously that customization, the ability to take a process for one group that you're doing it for, or in one state where the regulations are one way, or whatever it may be, and turning it to say, okay, well, now things have been updated. I've got new regulations, or now I've got a different customer with different requirements, or now I've got a different regulations because I'm in a different state. You'll be able to customize the processes that you're engaged in, so you get the same level of rigor, but because you've standardized, but you get it tweaked to exactly what you need for that particular project. And then finally, integration, of course, is something that's so important to a platform. Being able to integrate bidirectionally with things like Esri, IBM Maximo, Salesforce, whatever, if you name it. One of the things that's really cool about Fulcrum is the number of integration capabilities that it has, and how effectively you can both manipulate Fulcrum from some other system, and how easily you can provide you can make things happen in Fulcrum that affect other systems. It's really that integration capability is a standout for us. And this, like I said, it's not a 6-month process. It's not a year-long process. Getting to the point where it's an effective platform is really critical to us right out the chute. The result of that is that if you invest $1,000, so you're a small team, so that $1,000 is over the course of a year. You're a big team, you might do that in a month, I don't know. But we're going to make sure that we're returning 8 to 18 times that amount to customers. The ability to support large customers or small customers with really critical capability that gives them a hard ROI is very, very important to us. And that ROI comes from things like saving employee time, increasing the capacity of your existing staff, potentially reducing the staff that you have, or relying less on contract staff. Both of those are 2 of the key ways that that client impact is seen. We have been around for long enough to acquire a large number of customers, approaching 3,000 at this point. And the customers that we're most proud of are those who have taken Fulcrum and made Fulcrum a centerpiece of their innovation with respect to service performance and reliability. We have, I could put a lot more on this slide, of course, but I'm just going to name Trek, lower right-hand corner. Trek is a company that does manhole and pipe inspections, water inspections for municipalities and other government organizations. They saw a need to bring together field tech, 3D cameras in their case, and Esri ArcGIS in order to get really good information about the location of the assets they were inspecting, and to be able to integrate that with all of the process benefits that they got by using a 3D camera. So they're able to do things like look at the camera and determine whether that pipe is actually the 12 inches that they say it's going to be in the specs, or whether it's 15 inches. And they're able to do that using a combination of the 3D camera and Fulcrum. So by being able to bring together those capabilities, they are now able to offer unique products, or unique services, rather, I should say, that other companies just simply can't get to. And in fact, they do offer a new product. That 3D camera is pretty cool, and they offer that as well as part of their offering too. So if you're interested in being an innovator, then welcome into the organization that is going to help you become that innovator in service, performance, and reliability. That is the end of my prepared remarks. If you're not a Fulcrum client yet, if you are a Fulcrum client, then I recommend that you reach out to your account executive to get a demo of audio fast fill or the GIS capabilities we've put into the product lately. There's a ton that's going on, and there's always an opportunity to learn more and do more within Fulcrum. The capabilities there are huge. If you are not yet a Fulcrum customer, then I encourage you to reach out to us for a free demo. Go to fulcrumapp.com, and you'll be able to see exactly the kind of thing that we do in your industry using your use cases. We'll really understand what you're looking for and come back to you and talk to you about how we could supply that need. Last item for me before Q&A, a short Q&A, sorry, is that our next webinar is on March 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern time, where I'll be talking about that regulatory uncertainty that we talked about at the beginning. The name of the webinar is Stay Ahead of Regulatory Changes with Field Tech Built to Bend, and where I gave you a taste of what's going on today and a taste of the uncertainty with NEPA today. We'll be talking about that in much more detail on the 20th. With that, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions we may have received, and let's see if we have any at this point. One of the questions was, my team is concerned with technology because they've always done it a certain way. We've tried other tools before. What makes Fulcrum easier to understand and implement? I'm going to say, first of all, seeing is believing, right? So if you haven't used Fulcrum before, get a demo, help understand it, because I think it's really important to try it so you understand it. It's easier to see than it is to say. Having said that, there's two places where ease of use is paramount. The primary one, the number one place, is for the person standing out in the field, the person with boots on the ground in the field. For that person, we take away a lot of things that might be considered bells and whistles in other platforms. They are, the Fulcrum app looks very ordinary. It's plain, it's simple. So when you've got a bunch of different fields that you need to think about, or a bunch of different things you need to fill in, you're doing a simple scroll, you're doing a simple tap, you're doing, when you tap on something, it might drop down a box of things. It's very important to use very simple techniques to get the maximum effect out of this. One company that we work with, loves to, the person who's responsible for building those apps always takes out one of his team members. They call him Stump, and I know people look at me like I'm crazy when I say this, but that's, if you introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm Jake, what's your name? He'll say, I'm Stump, and I'm like, okay, but that's his name, okay? So don't make fun of me for it, or don't criticize me for it, that's just his name. Anyway, they go out with Stump, and Stump has been around the block. He's there. He's one of the most seasoned members of the team, I'll say, and he's not a technology person. He doesn't like it very much. When Stump is able to use it, when Stump says, yeah, this is no problem and it helps me more than it bothers me, then they know it's really ready for release. And that happens very quickly. Being able to acclimate people to something that really doesn't need training is hugely important. Just one more example of that field person being the focus of effort for us. In 2020, the county of Fresno in California had a wildfire, and in order to get funding for remediation, they needed to convert a FEMA form into a Fulcrum app. They'd never used Fulcrum before. There was one contractor on their team who had used Fulcrum before, and he said, hey, why don't we try this? They converted the form in 10 minutes. They uploaded a whole bunch of data into Fulcrum from various streets and points that they had from ArcGIS and so on. And within a couple of hours, they had a working app that was fully loaded with data. The next morning, there was a person standing in a parking lot waiting for volunteers to come. The volunteer would come, they'd say, okay, download Fulcrum. They'd get the Fulcrum app on their phone, and it'd say, this is what it looks like. go to the next location. You got the following locations. Go to the next location, take pictures if you need to, tell us what you saw, and move on, right? Being able to have a volunteer go out and collect information, accurate information that goes into a FEMA form is the height of let's focus on how easy things are to use. So I get it. We've always done a certain way, can be challenging. And we've talked to customers who have always had to work through that. Absolutely get it. But try it. And what you'll find is that those field workers are the ones coming back to you for with more ideas about what to do. Oh, by the way, I said there was two ways. The other one is for the developer, right? The person who's actually creating the apps. Again, easier to see than to talk about, but it's really simple. And then if you have requirements that go outside the drag and drop environment, we've made it as easy as possible to have a lot of different ways that you can customize Fulcrum to make it as usable as possible. Last question, and then we gotta go. You use the term bolt-on. I think that means apps other vendors provide. Will you integrate with all of them, or do you replace them fully? I'll say we can do either one of those. Generally speaking, it's a better idea to simply replace them where it makes sense to do so. In some cases, we've basically integrated Fulcrum into something, so into a bolt-on app where you will you'll be in that bolt-on app, right? Because you have to, because that's the requirement. But when you click on a certain thing, it will bring up a piece of Fulcrum inside that app and enable you to collect the specific data you need, or access certain kinds of information that you need, or whatever it might be. So we have done both, but generally speaking, I think it's just better. It's much cleaner if you replace the bolt-ons with Fulcrum, and that way you only got one thing to know out there in the field. The user interface experience is very simple. It's just a much more straightforward way of going. I got to almost all the questions. There's a couple left. I will respond to those individually by email. I'd like to thank you all for being here. I know it's it's an hour out of your day, and I really appreciate the amount of time you spent with us. So if you do have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you for your attendance today.